is back into it in Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes! Yes! The center back, Jacob Glesnes, is going for it. Oh my God! What a goal! And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union, and they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and I'm super excited to be giving you guys this episode today. Hopefully you guys are still riding on that high of the win over New York City over the weekend. And look, this episode, there's been a lot of talk on social media. Are the Philadelphia Union going to sign Jose Riasco? When are they going to announce the signing? So we saw over the past week that Jonathan Tannenwald, Transfer Market, they confirmed that the Philadelphia Union have indeed signed Jose Riasco. They just haven't officially announced it yet. And so we're going to talk about Jose Riasco. We're going to talk about the development of Jose Martinez since joining the Union. We're going to talk about what kind of player is Jesus Bueno exactly. And, you know, there is nobody better to join me than the author of the book, Red Wine and Arepas, How Football is Becoming Venezuela's Religion. He's also the host of FUTVE English podcast, your number one English podcast for Venezuelan soccer. He is Jordan Floyd. Jordan, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for the very generous and kind introduction. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak about Venezuelan football.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we talked before, this is our third podcast now. So people that aren't familiar with who you are, I had you on once when I was covering the English Premier League. You were coming on to promote your book that I just talked about, Red Wine and Arepas. And I said at the time, you know, you were going on a podcasting tour because you were hitting up every single podcast you could. You didn't care what they covered. As long as you can get the word out there. And so, like, you were hitting podcast after podcast, and you kept yourself quite busy appearing on just all those podcasts. And, you know, then afterwards, you came on to the podcast to talk about finishing the book. And again, just for people that are unaware, that whole project was backed by 191 people, I believe it was, on Kickstarter, who believed in you, believed in the work that you were doing. You're originally from England. Now you're living in Venezuela, covering the league as a whole, I believe. But man, I can remember those late night conversations on Twitter, like at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. over in England, and you're up. And then in a couple of hours, you're awake, promoting the book on Twitter. Like, you were not getting much sleep during the time of writing this book. And honestly, I mean, like, I'm not saying that just because you're on the podcast, but I don't think I met a harder worker than you. Just all those hours you put into this project, flying from England to Venezuela to write this book. And you did it all with a broken arm too. So what's it been like the last couple of years for you, living in England and then going to Venezuela to finish writing this book? And then, like I said, now you're living in Venezuela permanently.
Yeah, it's not something I expected to be doing back in 2019. Not when I started the book, and to be honest, not when I finished the book. You know, near enough a year later either. I thought maybe I'd write the book, and obviously I was always going to have an interest in Venezuela because, you know, my interest in the country, you know, predated writing the book by a good 7 years, and my interest in the football in the country predated writing the book by 2 years. So I knew I wasn't just going to write a book and then never think about Venezuela again, but I never expected it would change my life in the way it did. And the time zone difference, and also the fact that year I became a dad for the first time, these things, like, you know, prepared me for the lack of sleep that sort of defined my life ever since. But yeah, like you said, at the time I was just grateful to anyone that would give me the opportunity to talk about the book and Venezuelan football, and to go on a podcast tour, as you said, was sort of like essential to getting the book off the ground, because I turned down a conventional, book deal or publishing deal, as you know. And yeah, like you said, near enough 200 people bought my book before I'd even written the first chapter. I funded it on pre-orders, and that's sort of how I've approached everything I've done in my journalism career and now my career in football. I've never seen the film myself, and apparently it's a misquote, but my dad always said it to me. It's actually an American film, a baseball film, but from the field of dreams. My dad has always said to me, build it and they will come. And I know that's a misquote apparently, but that's how I've always approached everything. If you believe in something and you start building it, if what you're doing is good, people will tag along.
Yeah, absolutely. And It's crazy too. Like, how do you convince your family? We've been living in England, and like you said, you just had a son born and everything. Like, all right, we're gonna go ahead and live in Venezuela now. I mean, that's a total different time zone change. Like you said, a whole different culture shock from leaving England to going down to Venezuela, where I'm not saying that they don't live and breathe soccer in England, but when you think of Venezuela, you think of all the baseball players that they produce, and not saying that they don't like soccer, but they've slowly but surely started producing talent. And I know we'll get into that here in a little bit, but like, just how were you able to convince your family this is what we're going to do?
Yeah, it wasn't easy, and like sort of convincing them or persuading them isn't something I wanted to do. It's not how I wanted this to happen. I wanted it to be a joint decision. I wanted my wife to feel comfortable about it, because originally I had the opportunity to go and live in Colombia and work on Venezuelan journalism and football projects from Colombia. But for the same reason why I was never going to write a book about Venezuelan football without going to Venezuela, I didn't really want to be working and earning my money through Venezuelan projects, be it journalism or football, if I wasn't actually in the country. I really think that would lack some authenticity. So if I was ever going to work in Venezuelan football, as a full-time job or journalism as a full-time job within Venezuelan topics, I wanted to be in Venezuela. But my wife was against living in Venezuela for, basically the news headlines. And how Venezuela was when I came in 2019 to how it was when I returned with my family in August 2021, nearly 2 years later, was vastly different. Venezuela, or at least Caracas, I'll just talk about Caracas because that's where I live and I don't want to stereotype the whole country. But Caracas has definitely improved in the 2 years between. And what ultimately led to us making the decision to come was that my wife got offered a job here. As a teacher. My wife's a teacher, and the British school in Caracas offered my wife a job, and that sort of came about quite circuitously because the former head of governors of the British school was the chief journalist for Reuters, based in Venezuela, and his son is a footballer. And the journalist Andy, he bought my book Red Wine and Arepas, and then he soon after the book reached out to me and said, "Hey, my son was a footballer in Venezuelan football academies all the way up until he was 16, 17. We then returned to England, like his son was born in Venezuela. We returned to England. He's doing really well. He's playing for Loughborough University, which is probably the best football university in the country. And one of the coaches from the national team under 20s has rung him up and said, would he be interested in coming to a training module? And of course he was, but this was enough for his son, Oliver, to think, well, maybe I do have a career in professional football. And he and his dad asked if there was any way I could help. And to cut the long story short, he's now a professional footballer in Venezuela with Carabobo, something I helped him do, but was achieved by the agent Karina Safo from IST. And Andy was like, hey, like, you've got so much passion for Venezuela. You obviously know what you're doing. Why don't you go and live in Venezuela? And, I explained the reservations, and he said, well, the British school are hiring teachers at the moment. Why don't you see if Helen's interested in applying for the job? And ultimately that's what brought us back. It allowed me to continue my career ambitions, but without there being a reason for my wife to be here as well, it wouldn't have happened.
Absolutely. I love that story, man. And it's funny how things work out where you totally don't expect to be living there. And like you said, 2 years later, there you are in Venezuela with your whole family, and to see the difference in the city from when you visited in 2019 to see it change in 2 years in 2021. I mean, that's also a great thing to hear. And the last thing I'll say before we get into today's topics is, so for people that may or may not remember, I had Aurelian Collin onto the podcast, and, that all came because of you, Jordan, getting him and I in contact with each other, and then eventually led to him coming onto the podcast. And I really do feel like that interview with Collin, although I was nervous, it gave me the confidence to prove to myself that, I can do this, give the fans of the Philadelphia Union the content that they deserve for this team. So I just want to say thank you again for that. But let's go ahead and talk about Jose Riasco, the man of the hour, who, Union fans are, after they listen to this podcast, they're like, all right, so this guy has me super excited. Union, please announce the deal. So this deal for Jose was in the works for quite some time. And like I said in the intro, last week, Jonathan Tannenwald and Transfer Market, Manuel Veth, I believe, both confirmed the deal to be done. Now, I remember back in January, maybe late December, a whole bunch of reports were coming out on this guy signing for the Philadelphia Union. I believe you guys over at FUTVE confirmed the reports, and there was a couple other journalists, I believe, in Venezuela as well, that said, yeah, this is done. The Philadelphia Union are signing Jose once he turns 18. He turned 18, I believe, in January, and Transfer Market took it a step further and said that the fee could reach up to $1.5 million. And the 18-year-old striker will initially play for the Union's MLS Next Pro side, but it's believed that the striker can make the jump to the MLS in short order. Initially, Ernst Tanner had been fighting for the transfer for some time, but ownership initially shied away from the significant investment. Ernst Tanner, however, pointed to Karim Adeyemi, who is a player that he brought in to Red Bull Salzburg, and his market value has developed, and it eventually convinced the Union's ownership to, hey, we got to go ahead and sign this guy. And I went up and pulled up the numbers for Karim when Ernst Tanner brought him into Red Bull. So his value was $7.3 million in 2020, and now today his market value is $38.5 million for Salzburg. Karim is supposed to be the next big player for Germany, the striker they've been longing for quite some time. So how exactly did Jose Riasco rise to the scene so fast? And I believe he just made his debut last season for La Guairá.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. He debuted at 17 last season, and he was very quickly evident to be a talent. I didn't think he was going to last long in Liga FUTVE at all. I was telling anyone that would listen to me about him, saying this guy is, if anyone deserves the tag next Salomon Rondon, it's Riasco. Like, he's 187 centimeters tall, 1.87. He's over 6 foot. And similarly, Rondon left at a young age. He left Venezuela just after being the Young Player of the Year for the league. Whilst he was at Aragua, he went to Spain. And Riasco similarly is young, just turned 18, and is leaving, as soon as he physically could leave the country. And he got 5 goals last season, had 13 starts, just over 20 appearances in general. And yeah, he for me, the weaknesses he has are age-related. Like the weaknesses he has, he can address as part of his development. For example, despite the fact he's quite tall, he's quite lightweight, but he has the frame to bulk out. Like he has physically broad shoulders. He's tall. He's got good gait. He's got good pass. If you compare him to Heriel de Santis, who left Venezuela at a similar age to Boavista in Portugal. Heriel de Santis, who is regarded as, one of, if not Venezuela's best under 20 striker right now. He, at the same age, I saw him live. He had a poor gait, had poor physique. Riasco doesn't have to overcome the same challenges that Heriel's had to overcome, and is overcome. He's in Portugal and he's doing well in the under-23s, and he has a very bright future too. The other, I think, weakness in Riasco's game is decision-making. Like sometimes he can hold on to the ball for a bit too long and get dispossessed. But when he's in the position to score, he hits the target over 60% of the time. He gets into good positions. He's pretty clinical, and to have that clinical nature at a young age is something that will stand him in good stead when the other attributes, like his mental attributes and his physical capacity, improves in the next couple of years. I think, Tanner knows not just MLS, but Tanner knows European football, and I'm sure he's got a pathway lined up for him there. And, I was first aware of this deal back in December, but no one, I think because of how people knew about the deal, it's not something that was going to be spoken about on social media back in December. So, Tanner's in one way or another fought for this transfer. I know I've read, I don't know myself, but I know I've read that there were issues with discovery rights, etc. And, Philadelphia Union, having signed Brujo Martinez from Zulia a couple of seasons back, signed Jesus Bueno from Deportivo Lara, and are now signing Riasco from Deportivo La Guairá. They've signed 3 players in 3-4 seasons from 3 separate clubs. Like it's obvious they've got a gauge on the league.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely touch on those two players on the ladder that you mentioned, but were there any other teams that you're aware of that were on Jose Riasco? I know you said there was an issue with the discovery rights, and that's one thing that Philadelphia Union fans, and not just Union fans, but MLS fans as a whole, like, cannot stand is like there's all these different like mechanisms in MLS. It's like, man, just if a team wants to sign a player, just let them. And it's like, oh no, this one team had the discovery rights for this player. So besides MLS teams, were there any other teams that you could have seen Jose going to, or was it just the Union that were interested?
So I don't know, categorically if there were other teams interested in Riasco. I would be surprised if not. And like I said, I was telling anyone that would listen that Riasco is a talent. But people have this reluctance to spend much money or big money, and this isn't big money. But, Riasco leaving, if that fee is $1.5 million, that would make him in the top 5, perhaps top 3 most expensive transfers out of Liga FUTVE. Like, I think the most expensive is just over $2 million, and that was Ronald Vargas to Belgium in around 2009. Heriel de Santis, the striker that left Caracas, went for just over $1 million to Boavista in the summer of 2020. So yeah, the fee is being, like, depending on the source, the fee for Riasco to Philadelphia is anywhere between $1 and $1.5 million. That's a big outlay. And for example, that's a striker who is 17, I say only because I'm comparing, only got 5 goals last season, whereas Samson Akanyula, the Caracas FC striker, who finished the Golden Boot winner, had 18 goals, was only 21, turning 22, and was potentially available for a similar price, $1.5 million. Yet people didn't go for Akanyula. The big differences between Riasco and Akanyula is height. Riasco is 1.87, Samson's around 1.73. So he's got like 15 centimeters on him. But for Philadelphia to spend this money on Riasco is serious money for Liga FUTVE, because between 2010 2020, only around 16-17% of all players that left Venezuela left for a fee. So, the vast majority, over 80% of players left as free transfers. And the average fee when a player was bought was just over $400,000. So this is good money, and it's a serious outlay for Philadelphia Union to make.
Absolutely. So I know we talked about his strengths and weaknesses, and so I know a Philadelphia Union fan hit up Jose on social media and asked him, hey, what his weaknesses were, what his strengths were, and Jose replied back, and he said that since playing first team football, he's got really good at being dominant in the air, learning how to play against the double pivots, learning to make those diagonal runs. Would you agree with those statements from him, where as the seasons went on, he's got better in those 1v1 situations, got better in the air, better against two lying holding midfielders? Yeah,
he had a particularly good performance last season, which I think demonstrated his game in general. And that was against Aragua back in July of last season. La Guairá won that game 5-0. Riasco got 2 goals, easily could have had a hat-trick. I think he may have grabbed an assist in that game as well, but or certainly was involved in the build-up for one of the goals. But one goal, I believe, was a header, and another was, a finish with his foot. But yeah, like I said, I underlined his weaknesses being things that will come with maturity and him filling out his figure. Because like I said, he's quite lightweight, but he's very tall. And another thing is, I think you need to look at the other players that have gone to MLS through Riasco's agent. JP Talento is the name of the agency. For example, he's Pablo Bonilla's agent at Portland Timbers. He had Brian Hurtado at Portland Timbers too as well, had a good season. Scored around 10 goals for Timbers too. Nothing came of that permanently, but there's aspects on what builds a story, if you like, for clubs to buy into when they're looking at a player. And like I said, this is a serious amount of money for a club to spend on a player from Liga FUTVE. In no way is it undeserved. It's just there's, in my opinion, bad habits when it comes to viewing talent from Liga FUTVE. People see it as a basement bin, wrong, in my opinion, wrongly. But because there are so many players over the years that have been taken for free, some clubs are like, well, why should we spend this amount of money when we could probably pick up a player like him or him soon for free? And it's an annoying attitude. It's also a lazy attitude. But, it's business at the end of the day, and I guess it's being made as a business decision. But Riasco has good pedigree, and I think this MLS Next Pro League is going to see, I think, an upturn in the amount of players that go from Venezuela to the US.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it. Jose Martinez and then Jesus Bueno, two guys coming to the Philadelphia Union from two separate clubs. And we've seen other players from Venezuela coming into the league, and we'll touch on them here in a little bit. But the last couple things I'll bring up for Jose Riasco before we talk about the league as a whole in Venezuela. I know you talked about him potentially going between 3 or 5 for the highest paid transfer fees for a player out of Venezuela. But in terms of not talking about the money, in terms of pure talent, where would you rank him as one of the top talents ever coming into the league?
That's a really difficult question to answer because he's so fresh on the scene. He only has just over 1,000 pro minutes. Like last season was his first season. And another thing to bear in mind with that is there's been no youth football really in Venezuela the past couple of seasons because of COVID. And not structured and organized and as a fuller season as it would be. Like in the past 9 to 12 months, there's been a return to youth football in terms of regional leagues or regional competitions. But similarly, he's missed out, although he would have been young for the generation, he's missed out on the opportunity to have played in the under-20 South American Championships last year because CONMEBOL cancelled all youth football until 2023. So the amount of material we have to base that decision on is difficult. But like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if there's any striker coming out of Venezuela in recent seasons, and we've had Dani Perez, for example, go to Club Bruges, who is, again, another tall striker, and a striker that he got 6 goals in Liga FUTVE, if I'm not wrong, in the 2020 season, and then was bought by Club Bruges. Riasco got 5 goals and is now being bought by Philadelphia Union. I think the tag of Next Talent Rondon sits better with Riasco's profile than Dani Perez. That's not based on talent. It's based on biotype and similarities. But what I think is good about this transfer is if Riasco has the potential to be one of the best Venezuelan players in recent years, this is a good first step because not only is he going to a club that trusts Venezuelan talent, you can see that through Brujo and the signing of Bueno, but also, like I said earlier, Ernst Tanner knows the European market, and I highly doubt I might be wrong, but I highly doubt you spend that amount of money on a 17-year-old just turning 18 if you don't have plans to sell him on for more money.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we want to enjoy these guys for a couple of seasons in MLS, but it's they have aspirations too to go to Europe because it's the highest honor that a player can have is playing in a top league in Europe. And I know we've seen Joseph Martinez go to Europe and then come back to MLS, and that's fine too, right? But I think us Philadelphia Union fans, we want players that want to play at the highest level. Not saying Joseph Martinez doesn't want to, but it seems like he has a pretty good deal down in Atlanta, and he's beloved down there. And by the time he retires, I mean, they might as well name Mercedes-Benz Stadium after him for everything he's done with Atlanta United. But Jim Curtin, the coach of the Philadelphia Union, I mean, he said it in the offseason too. He doesn't want players that just want to stay at the Philadelphia Union. He wants players that want to have aspirations and go back to Europe. And so I think this is exactly the kind of player that Ernst Tanner is always looking at, a player that might have been overlooked. And like you said, they've given 2 other Venezuelans chances before, and why not give a third? But let's go ahead and talk about La Guairá and developing talent. So they were formed in 2008, I believe. They had a name change in 2012, 2013. I think they got bought out by different owners, if I'm correct. And they've sent multiple players to MLS sides, most notably Christian Crassus to New York Red Bulls, Giovanni Bolivar, who was on loan last season with DC United, and then Luis Gonzalez, who was with FC Dallas in the 17-18 season on loan, I believe. So why have they been able to produce so much talent, and why specifically are MLS teams interested in players from the club, you believe?
Yeah, I think the main successes or the biggest successes, I think it's fair to say Christian Cáceres going to New York Red Bulls in 2018. Including Cáceres. Riasco is now the fourth player from La Guairá to go to MLS on like a permanent deal, if you like. Like Miguel Navarro is at Chicago Fire, Pablo Bonilla is at Timbers. Last season, Giovanni Bolivar and Da Luis Paz were both on loan from La Guairá at DC United. They play for Loudoun in USL. I think it's probably fair to say that, like I said, it goes on building a story and building trust. And, Christian Cáceres has been such a success coming out of La Guairá to MLS. And again, Cáceres was a player that was on New York Red Bulls' radar from the under-17 South American Championship. They had to wait until he was 18 to sign him permanently. So similar there's parallels there to Jose Riasco. Navarro and Bonilla's progress, I'd say, it's probably fair to say, has been slower than Christian Cáceres in terms of earning the minutes and becoming first-team regulars. There's, you can look when you're acting as a recruiter or a scout, or even if you're looking at it from a club-wide position, you can become aware of a player in anywhere, but let's say Venezuela. You become aware of a player in Venezuela, and easy ticks, if you like, is to think, okay, has that club generated any talent that's been in MLS before? And with La Guairá, you can point to 4 to 6 players since 2018 that have come to MLS or USL. Azucar is another one. Juan Carlos Azucar with Toros last season. He's now at Oakland Roots. And it builds a picture. So I think it's down to building trust. But then another thing is, it's not just clubs producing the players that can build a story and build trust, but it's also the agents. So, for example, Christian Cáceres, his agent, TNC Management, they are also the agents for Wiki Carmona, who New York Red Bulls again took as soon as he turned 18 and gave a DP slot to. And now Jesus Castellano, again, only just turned 18. And it's a relationship game, really. It does come down to trust. And I think that's what's led to the picture and led to the confidence for Tanner and Philadelphia Union as a club to invest really in Riasco. I think one thing that Venezuelan fans sort of expect of MLS, as in, not expect because MLS have been doing it, but expect MLS to start doing it, is, you're taking some of our best players. That's great. That's fine. You're platforming them, but there's yet to be any real proof of MLS being a stepping stone for Venezuelan talent. I know MLS have wanted to, or in particular clubs in MLS have wanted to, become a platform or the go-between from some of the best South American talent. You've seen like other South American players, from Argentina, from Peru, from Colombia, go to MLS. But, Almiron aside, it's yet to really prove itself as a springboard for South American talent. People are saying MLS are exporting young talent to Europe. Like, look at the players that have left in the past years. Okay, I'll look at those players that have left. Like, they're all USMNT players. They're by and large not South American players. And I think what I think Venezuelan football fans would like to see from MLS is it genuinely being a platform and a springboard for the Venezuelan talent to then move on to Europe.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think that is a good comparison. I mean, Christian's been at New York Red Bulls for quite some time, and I think he has the talent to play in Europe. He's always getting into the starting 11 for the national team. Joseph Martinez, like we talked about, was in Italy, and then I believe in one of the Scandinavian countries. Then he came over to MLS, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he's lighting the league on fire, and he has something good going for him down in Atlanta. Not saying that there isn't offers for him to go back to Europe. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there is, but when you're as loved as you are, getting paid as much money as he is down in Atlanta, I mean, that's kind of hard to say, yeah, I'm going to give this up, right? But nonetheless, I mean, he's a great talent. But let's go ahead and talk about Jose Martinez, who has been one of the best signings in Philadelphia Union club history. He's so beloved by the fans, by the coaching staff. This is a player who always plays for the badge, talks about how his love for the club is so strong. He's become a staple in the Venezuelan national team since he's been here. Maybe not always in the starting 11, but getting caught up on a consistent basis. Are you surprised at all to see Jose playing at the level he is now? Because, you talked about players just turning 18, leaving Venezuela, going to MLS. Jose, I think, came out at the age of like 22, 23 years old. So he was in Venezuela for a couple times, and I believe he never played outside of Venezuela before coming to Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's correct. I think he was actually older than that. I think he was 24, maybe even 25. And it's a really good case study because, again, so often, particularly with South America, it's a worldwide transfer recruitment. Like it's to the point of boredom, really. Clubs saying, yeah, we only sign under 23 players, or, we look to sign under 23 players. And Brujo Martinez is a perfect case study in why that doesn't need to be the case. He's a perfect rebuttal to the people that say, if this player was so good, why is he still in Venezuela at 25 and has never played outside? Players peak at different ages. Brujo had a season or two in the second division in Venezuela as well. And although there is promotion and relegation in Venezuela, unlike the US, especially in recent times, I can't think of too many success stories of sort of like a player that's climbed the divisions to then go abroad. Like the top talent normally starts in the top division, by and large. Obviously, there's always exceptions. But Brujo was, you could say there's a late bloomer narrative to him because he did have a season or two in the second division. He earned his way into, Zulia's first team. He then had that great Copa Sudamericana run to the quarterfinals, I believe, that all preceded his move to Philadelphia Union. And now he's gone from strength to strength. And, I've seen MLS clubs, transfer wish list for upcoming windows. And when clubs want a defensive midfielder, when clubs want a six, it's Brujo Martinez. They're saying, we want a player like. We want a player like Brujo Martinez. For so long, I know he's not exactly a like-for-like player, but, Darlington Nagbe, for a long time, he was also a biotype where clubs said, we want a midfielder like Darlington. Now clubs are saying, we want a midfielder like Brujo Martinez. Almost to the point where perhaps he's typecasting an element of Venezuelan talent. You're going to have MLS clubs looking at Liga FUTVE to find the next Brujo Martinez.
Yeah, he's been unbelievable. And look, I think there were a lot of question marks when the Union announced the signing. And maybe there was even questions from the coaching staff because he was brought here to not even be the number one choice. He was going up against a young European guy, Matej Orvats, fighting for that number 6 position. And Jose beat him out. And there was no room for Orvats here. And so he got loaned back to Europe and everything. And I remember his first game ever against LAFC. Brujo was just all bloody and everything. It's like, yeah, this is a Philly player. This guy left it all out on the field. And we saw the aggressiveness. And to his credit, and even Jim Curtin talked about this, I think, this week against New York City, or it was last week against San Jose, where he credits him where, the league's looking to get him in trouble. Players are looking to get him in trouble because he's an aggressive type player, and he's done a good job to control his emotions, to bring that down from when he first came here. And that's a huge credit to him. And like I said earlier, he's one of the best signings ever that the Philadelphia Union have ever made. And to see him come out of Venezuela at such a older age than what most players are coming out at, to see him take those steps and to be where he's at now, like I said, playing consistently for the national team, getting caught up consistently to the national team. I never saw this coming. I'm sure a lot of Union fans didn't see this either, but maybe for some people in Venezuela, they always thought that this is the type of player he could have been. And so I guess that is my final and last question about Jose Martinez is, how do you see the Venezuelan fans feeling about him?
Yeah, I think they really bought into him in the national team last season. And I think the main reason is the same reason as why Philadelphia Union fans love him. He's a blood and guts player. He gives it his all. He does not stop. He's not technically the most gifted, but he does everything. And in the Copa America, Venezuela had a very depleted squad, which gave him his opportunity to play because that midfield was pretty locked up in a good way as well. Like they had Thomas Rincon, the captain, who, you know, has hundreds of games in Europe, has games in Germany, has games in Italy, played for Juventus, over 100 caps for Venezuela, by and large partnered in central midfield by Yangel Herrera, who, you know, was at New York City a couple of seasons ago. He's owned by Manchester City. He's been on loan in La Liga in Spain for the past couple of years. So it was probably the strongest area or the most nailed on area of the pitch for starters. And Brujo and Cáceres really starred in that Copa America, not only playing midfield, but playing in roles that they weren't used to. For example, I think Cáceres and Brujo both spent time playing as wingers in that tournament. And, you know, that was not because they're wingers, although Cáceres started as a winger, but it's because you could rely on those players to run all game up and down, would not stop, would give it their all. And like none of this belittles the technical side of his game. Like I said, he isn't technically the strongest, but he's also not bad. And I think with Brujo, I'll tone down the language for the benefit of your podcast, but like my best friend back in England, Ryan, he said like every team needs a dickhead, and Brujo is Philadelphia Union's dickhead. Like he's the kind of player you hate when you're up against him as a fan or a player, but you want on your team. You want that player, and Brujo plays that role perfectly. But off the pitch, he's not like that at all. Like you see the videos of him dancing to training with his headphones on. Over Christmas, he came back to Maracaibo, his home state. Zulia, his home state, went to Maracaibo and was giving out Christmas presents and making a difference in his community with donations and projects. Like I imagine he's an absolutely great guy to have in the changing room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the perfect character, and you're right, absolutely. Like having a player like that, like teams hate playing against somebody like that. And I can remember being a Manchester United fan when Ander Herrera was at the club. He was that type of player too, that gets under opposing players' skins and everything's going to make you feel the tackle and everything. And it's good to hear that other MLS teams say that, yeah, we need the next Jose Martinez in the club. And that's a credit to him and just the way that he's asserted himself on the MLS stage and with the national team as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the final Venezuelan player that the Philadelphia Union have signed under Ernst Tanner, and that is Bueno. And this is a player who was captain of his old club, Deportivo La Guairá, at the age of 21. And right there, I think that tells you everything you need to know about him as a player, to be a captain at that young of age, where, you know, if you're giving him the captain's armband, then that means that he's going to be in your starting 11 every single game. And he's only played 8 times for the Union since he made his move from Venezuela. So Union fans really aren't sure what type of player he is. He was brought in to be an 8, we thought, but he seems to be built more as a 6. What kind of player do you exactly see Jesus as?
Yeah, so Bueno can definitely play both positions. He's quite capable of being, you know, a mobile, dynamic midfielder, but like it's fair to say that most of his minutes, most of his game has come from the 6 role. But he's not the same kind of 6 as Brujo. I think Bueno has qualities to play as like a deep lying midfielder. I think in his final full season in Venezuela, you know, in 20 games he had around 8 or 9 goal involvements, pretty evenly split between goals and assists. He passes very well. His success rate just across the board of doing things successfully is high 80s. His pass completion rate is high 80s. He's a very tidy midfielder. He's also got a good physique. He's not the tallest, but he's strong. And yeah, I can see him being a successor to Brujo if Brujo got like a late career move to Europe. But he's also the kind of player that could be quite capably a partner to Brujo. He's still young enough and versatile enough with a strong enough technical portfolio to either mould into a replacement for Brujo or mould into a partner for Brujo. I was a big fan of his. When he was in Liga FUTVE, obviously still am, but like I could see he was going to move out sooner rather than later. I think for me, he was the 2nd or 3rd best player in the league in general in 2020. Can't really comment on 2021 because he left so early in the season. And, you know, I know that there were clubs interested in him in Europe before he went to Philadelphia Union, but obviously not as committed as Philadelphia Union were to getting their deal done. And sometimes that can be timing. Obviously, Liga FUTVE and MLS's calendar lines up a lot better than Europe. Europe, by and large, do their big outlays or their big team building in the summer. And, you know, that doesn't fit Venezuela's transfer window as well. So maybe just the stars aligned to bring him to Philly. But I certainly think that, you know, there's nothing to worry about that Bueno hasn't made the immediate impact that Martinez had. Like you said yourself, Martinez wasn't expected to have that immediate impact. You know, the responsibility wasn't there for him to deliver from day one. And I think Philadelphia Union will give, you know, patience and time to Bueno as well.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And Jordan, it's been a blast having you on this podcast. And one last question I'll leave you with before I let you plug all your social medias and everything is, so I think I already know the answer just from hearing you talk about relationships, and that seems to be the name of the game, is making relationships with agents, with leagues and everything. And I'm sure you're going to say yes, but do you continue to see MLS and Venezuela working, getting players in? I know you said that the fans of Venezuela want to see MLS send those players to Europe eventually, or does Europe start to get involved here, go straight to Venezuela and not see how they do in MLS?
Yeah, I think clubs and fans would, you know, with no disrespect to MLS at all, but I think clubs and fans would like to see Venezuela's best talent go straight to Europe rather than via MLS. Firstly, because players in general, fans in general, just want their players in Europe. But also, like, for, you know, from a business sense for clubs, if they sell a player to MLS, and they have, you know, because the initial outlay isn't great, but they have like a sell-on percentage in all honesty, if that player goes to Europe and produces well, a sell-on figure is worth more to the selling club if that player is being sold from a European club than if they're being sold by an MLS club. And at the moment, like I said, you know, MLS is yet to prove itself as a springboard for Venezuelan talent. So those sell-ons are fairly meaningless, or fairly low value if the players just, you know, moving on within MLS. So I think an ultimate ambition of the league and clubs individually will be to sort of bypass MLS, and not just MLS, but also the other biggest South American leagues like Brazil and Argentina and Chile. Like, for example, Jefferson Soteldo, who was at Toronto last season, you know, he went from Venezuela to Chile, from Chile to Brazil, from Brazil to MLS, and now he's in Mexico. You know, I think Venezuela would like the next Soteldo, or the next player of Soteldo's potential, to go straight to Europe. And I think they're players like Yerson Chacon, who was player of the year at Deportivo Táchira last season. He's only 18, 2003. And Telasco Segovia, a midfielder at Deportivo Lara, was the partner of Jesus Bueno in 2020 and 2021. These 18-year-olds, although there's, you know, already MLS interest in those players, you know, I would like, as a fan of Venezuelan football as well, to see them go straight to Europe.
Like fans of MLS say the same thing about the young Americans you were talking about, where, yeah, that's pretty much all that's left MLS the last couple of years is young Americans to Europe. So it's like, we're not any different than any other league around the world, because, like we said, Europe's a top level that all players want to be at eventually. So we shall see what happens, but I think that's great insight that you gave us on 3 Venezuelans for the Philadelphia Union. Hopefully fans are super excited for Jose Riasco, for what is to come for Jesus Bueno. But Jordan, where can people find you on social media? And they can still get the book, Red Wine and Arepas, I believe, on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, of course. So my socials, my personal account is just my name, Jordan Floret, on Twitter. On Instagram, Red Wine and Arepas, the name of the book, my personal account. But then, yeah, I co-run FUTVE English with Dominic Basonio. Dominic is a Venezuelan American in Minnesota. He's really into lower league football in the US. I believe he's a Minnesota fan as well, but he co-runs FUTVE English with me. His handle is DG Basonio on Twitter. But yeah, it's easy to find him through FUTVE English. And we have a fortnightly podcast dedicated to all things Venezuelan football. And yeah, again, the book is still available on Amazon, be it as a physical copy, although please bear in mind, obviously shipping from the UK to the US at the moment is particularly slow with everything going on in the world. But yeah, the digital copy is available immediately through Amazon, be it .co.uk or .com. And also I have a Big Cartel website for the book too.
Absolutely. And thank you for taking time out of your day, Jordan. And so glad to get you back on the podcast. And for sure, when these players continue to impress, I'd love to have you on, or maybe the Philadelphia Union go out and sign yet again another Venezuelan player, and hopefully they can be as good as the three that are currently at the club. But in case people still aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow @FreeKickPod, wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick. And yeah, let's hope that we see Jose with the first team sooner rather than later, and hopefully he just kicks the ground running down in the Union's second team. And yeah, let's just hope that more players from Venezuela come to MLS, and then MLS can get those players sent to Europe, because that's what we all want, and that's how the Philadelphia Union are built. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.